Give just a few minutes for people to hop on here. This is a very, very tough subject for all of us, even those of us presenting tonight. So please, I want everyone to know that this is not done lightly. It has, and I'll let Natalie speak to her own getting prepped for it, but definitely do not take this lightly. And when we titled the title for tonight of Unbroken, we tried every other explanation first. I just want to be very, very clear that we literally tried every other explanation first. So tonight we are going to be talking about the 2x2 church and why it qualifies as a cult, and also why it's important that we understand that, and why it's important that we move forward with that common knowledge really between everybody out there. So this is the first time we've kind of had a public dialogue around it. But our guest today is Dr. Natalie Bolin. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on introductions because I did post all of her qualifications earlier today. It is public information. I hope that all of you will go out there and take a look at that. She is highly, highly educated. She's born and raised in the 2x2 church. And she has a lot to say about this subject, so I'm going to literally open the door and say, welcome, Dr. Bolin. Thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you for all that you have done, all that you will do in this effort for people to heal. Most importantly, I also want to say that she is the executive director and runs Pathways to Healing. So for those of you who are not familiar with that, she can talk about it a little bit, but it is a very, very important piece of the healing process for victims, all of us really, in this whole process. So I'm going to just open it up to you. Natalie Bolin, everyone, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Crystal, and thanks again for having this platform. Before we jump into this conversation, I really just want to take a few moments to acknowledge just the past few days. There's been some pretty powerful videos, red boxes, worker correspondence that have been publicly posted. It feels, and we're feeling this on the Pathway side, that we're definitely in another wave of information coming out. And so videos of just advocates desperately trying to change a very corrupt system and bring light to pretty awful behaviors within the ministry, to red boxes that Cynthia post, to recent text messages, I mean literally from 2 weeks ago, emails that yet again just reinforce the betrayal of the ministry. And I'll tell you, this information does not get easier to hear, and it does not get easier to digest. So this can all bring up all different emotions, and so I want to encourage everyone, please lean into your support system, check in with your friends, please, and then if you need to, reach out to Pathways. You can connect with us. We have our website, pathwaystohealing.org, that you can say connect with us, and it comes to the 3 clinicians that monitor that email. So I didn't want to begin this discussion tonight just without this initial acknowledgement. So let's all take a deep breath. All right, so when we start talking about cults and high control religion groups, I think it's really first important to talk about the foundation of where this comes from, where this discussion comes from. And so talking about culture, talking about traditions, and talking about norms. And Crystal, I loved you had Mike on last week talking a lot about traditions. And so we'll kind of recap that a little bit. But so when we think about culture, and I didn't think I had a culture growing up. And it wasn't until I started doing my grad work, my master's in social work, we actually had to write a paper on what is our culture. And so I, at first, approached the paper like, well, I don't really have one. And then when I started writing and started researching, I realized, oh, I do. And it's the church. And so when you think about a culture, it's really just a shared belief, value, it's shared attitudes, and it's really that umbrella that covers it's a way of life. For a lot of people, it defines what's right and what's wrong. And so when you think of it as our umbrella, specifically for the 2x2 church, we have a very distinct culture. So we think about it's very patriarchal. Ooh, I cannot even get that word out tonight.
Patriarchal?
Yes, thank
Yes.
you. It is one true way, the only way. Part of our culture is to believe that it's salvation by work, not by grace. It's believing that, which many people don't believe this anymore, but ministry are direct descendants of the apostles. You know, this really plays into our like the shared belief and the shared values. So when then you move into traditions, which are specific practices or customs that get passed down from generation to generation, and it embodies the cultural values. So when you think about the meeting format, which can vary region to region, but for the most part, it's the same. You think about how conventions are and how they run. You think about the topics of professing and baptism, the expectations about who you're going to marry, right? Versus going into the work. Those could be those traditions that are passed from generation to generation. And then we think about specific behaviors or rules, and those would be our norms. So what's considered normal or typical behavior within a culture. So when we think about the rules, we think about dress, hair, and that's both for men and women, makeup, jewelry, but then it even goes into how we're supposed to act with humility, meekness, this whole idea of dying to self. That's pretty like the behaviors that are expected, being part of the 2x2 church. And then the secrecy around, especially around money and giving of money. That's another set of expected behavior or rules. So that's just the foundation I wanted to establish before we move into what is the definition of a cult? And the term cult is really interchangeably in a lot of research with high controlled religious groups. They often use the term interchangeably, and because they have similar dynamics. I think, a lot of experts, they see high controlled religious groups as part of like a continuum of a cult or a very authoritarian group. So it's really, I've kind of noticed like a spectrum versus like, oh, these are separate categories. So going into the definition of a cult, if you look it up in Wikipedia, cults are social groups which have unusual and often extreme religious, spiritual, or philosophical beliefs and rituals. And you can interchange the word rituals with traditions or norms. And so that is the definition of a cult. When you look at core principles of a cult, so, what does this look like? Well, you've got authoritarian leadership. You have very rigid hierarchies, and there's a limited input from either members outside the group or even within the friends, right? Trying to move change upward. We saw where that landed, and it didn't. We had people that were trying to create change upward into this hierarchy. Another principle would be the use of manipulation, fear, shame, social pressure to control members' behaviors, beliefs, relationships. And so there's a lot of fear and shame that is interwoven into the system. And so then there's also this us versus them mentality. So, and cults do a really good job of instilling black and white thinking. This is good and this is bad. And so they create that isolation and that separation. And we always heard that, right? Oh, it's the outside, or be very careful on who you spend your time with, and so forth. And that's to create that isolation piece. When you start looking at cult research, I came across Dr. Janja Lalich probably about a year and a half ago. She is a sociologist. She was in a cult for 40 years, a pretty extreme political cult. She's from California and used to work up at Chico State. But she did 2 YouTube videos, one with the X2x2 support group, and then one with Mark Simmons, an ex-worker. And you can find them on YouTube. Super helpful to watch them. But I love the way, and we'll put all of these links too as well, but I love the way that she defines a cult. And yes, she classifies the 2x2 church as a cult. And she comes out and she says that actually in both videos. But she defines a cult as a group or movement with usually extreme ideologies. So it's typically embodied in a charismatic leader or leaders that demand a very high level of commitment, and they have a very strong influence over members' lives. So you will see this in the way of behaviors that there's no questions allowed, or if there are questions, they're not answered. Or you'll get a response, well, this question does not deserve an answer. The inability to criticize the leaders. There is no accountability unless you cross leadership. And then what we have seen in the 2x2 church is if you do cross, and when I talk about leadership, I'm talking about the ministry, then you see excommunication. And that has happened in different waves over the many years. When you start looking, Sherry Kropp's book is a great place to kind of look at patterns of behavior with excommunication. And then she also talks about when groups become a cult when there's no transparency, especially about money. And so, one thing I've been wrestling with for the past 3 years, I'm an educated woman, and how did I not see this before now? And just trying to wrap my brain around that. I was born and raised in the church, married my husband, who was also born and raised in the church. But Dr. Lalich, she created, it's called the bondage choice theory, and it really is helpful in understanding, and it gives a system perspective of like how people stay in cults, especially when they say, oh no, there's free will. You're making the choice to stay. You could leave at any time. When you know that, yes, that's probably true, but there's good reason why people stay or they don't recognize that they're in a cult. And again, Dr. Lalich, and I'm also going to talk about Dr. Steven Hassan, who both were in cults for many, many years. And they're highly educated people and, found themselves in these systems as well. But when you start looking at the theory, the bondage choice theory, so in the first kind of level, you have your authoritarian leader or leaders, usually started by one person. Well, we know now William Irvine. For a lot of us, had never heard of William Irvine other than 3 years ago, and some people have heard this, at different times. But you also have overseers and workers who you cannot question. And they have done a very good job of connecting themselves to the apostles, the direct descendants of the 12 apostles. And so you've got this this authoritarian leadership, and then that spiritual leadership parallel with it. And then when you look at, Dr. Lalich talks about the belief system. So for many, it's an all-encompassing belief system. It's one true way. For the 2x2 church, all other churches are false religion. Salvation is dependent upon hearing the gospel message from the workers. In the belief system, we hear this all the time, even now, workers are spirit-led. So then it becomes morally wrong to question workers. It's kind of like questioning God. When you talk about system, or you start looking on system control, that's when you look at rules and regulations. So we talked about norms, what's normal behavior within this system. And while it can be negative, it can also be protective. And we'll kind of go into that, further on in our discussion tonight. But that really kind of encompasses like the system of control. And then you have system of influence. And so a ton of shame, a ton of not feeling worthy, fear. I think for those people that have gone to conventions their whole life, there was typically, a Saturday evening message about a young adult who didn't profess and died in a terrible accident. And that, that was just part of playing into that system of influence. So when you think about people having free will, well, that becomes altered because of all of these beliefs. Many people were born and raised in this, so this becomes a normal way of thinking. It's easy to get trapped in a closed system where there's not outside influences. And for those of us that work outside, we work, we have careers. I know for myself, like I did a really good job of compartmentalizing life. So work was work, meeting life was meeting life, sports was sports, and they didn't intersect at all. They were kept very, very separate. And so then you think about major life decisions, utilizing these lenses that Dr. Lalich talks about. When we start thinking about relationships of who we date and who we ultimately marry, do they fall, within the norms of the church? You think about careers. Many of us chose our career to kind of fit in to the church. I remember when I started looking at different colleges, one of the things considered was, were there other professing kids that went to that college? Was there meetings close by? How many friends were there? And made decisions based on that. Later on in life, major life decision on what type of house to buy. For us, it was like, well, is the living room big enough to have meeting in? Are there steps? So all of these things play into these major life decisions. And so it's important to kind of recognize this. So when I mentioned Dr. Steven Hassan, he is a cult researcher as well, and he developed the BITE model, and this is just really helpful. You can actually go and do an assessment online to kind of see where you fall and your experiences fall. But it's a framework to understand like how cults and other high control groups use influence to override a person's autonomy. And so he breaks this up into 4 different areas, and we're going to start doing some deeper dives in these 4 different areas. And then we're going to really look at what this looks like in real life. So he talks about behavioral control, information control, thought control, and emotion control. And this really impacts a person's identity and choices. And we'll share a link. There is a PDF doc that breaks all of these up with kind of like check boxes underneath it. And again, not every, mark, you don't have to check every single one. Oh, this qualifies for a cult, this doesn't. This is just really guides people to understand and realize what's been going on and how they've been affected and influenced. So kind of moving into the B, so behavioral control. And this really looks at what people do. So we talked about norms, so imposed rigid rules, regulation. So norms are shared. They're, for the 2x2, a lot of unwritten rules. You hear kind of out of both sides of the mouth, oh, we don't have any rules. And yeah, we do have rules. They're just not written. But it's expectations that really guide acceptable behavior. It influences beliefs, practices within an organization, so within a church. And so this behavior control is how people dress, our hair, what does our hair look like, limited contact with people from the outside of the group. You look at time spent with the group, and so one qualifications of a cult is excessive schedules. So when you think about 3 meetings per week, often driving long distances to gospel meeting, and the expectation was you would do that and you would drive sometimes up to 2 hours one way. Under this area is also this thought around reward and punishment that's used to modify behaviors. And so we think about, within the church, what were the rewards, right? Who were the families that seemed to have the majority of the time, like the worker time spent at their house, versus being shunned or talked to modify different behaviors. The other topic that falls under this area is instilling dependency and obedience. And I wanted to talk about dependency because, over time, people lose a sense of personal agency because their actions are, constantly being looked at, evaluated, corrected. And it's not just by the ministry, it's by the friends, it's by people within the meetings as well. There was so much gossip. I mean, it was crazy. People talked but didn't talk. And I can remember, for my own experience, I think I mentioned it in the last video, I played roller derby for 13 years, skated, was an elder's wife, playing roller derby. And we had a couple times where workers came over to do an intervention, trying to get me to stop playing this sport because it was not appropriate for an elder's wife to be doing this. So really that lean into obedience. But when we think about dependency and we think about codependency, there's a correlation between behavior control and codependency. If you don't know about Melody Beattie, please get to know her. Her expertise is in codependency. She wrote the book Codependency No More. This is a newer book, The Language of Letting Go. And so, both books are super helpful, very easy to read. But when we look at high control religious groups or cults, they often mirror the dynamics of a codependent relationship, like domestic violence. And so when you start thinking about control and you start thinking about the dynamics that are in a domestic violence relationship, it mirrors what we see in cults and high control religious groups. So you see chronic shame, you see fear of abandonment, There is some pressure to manage other spirituality. You know, we hear, oh, this comes a lot from the ministry. I have their salvation in my hands. And you create some reaction mode where people live in anxiety and obligation rather than having their own individual choice and authenticity. And so people learn to abandon their own needs and feelings just to stay safe within the system, good, accepted, all those things. So this creates a really deep emotional and spiritual dependency. So when we talk about, and I'm going to kind of bird walk us just a little bit to talk through codependency, because it really does play in a lot in what we see just on the pathway side of things too. People reaching out, needing help, finding treatments, therapy treatment. So when we think about codependency, it's really losing sight of yourself. And the reason for that is because your energy is so consumed by managing, pleasing, obeying either someone else or a system that's outside of your own self. We see patterns of low self-worth. We see repression. We see obsessions with other people's approval. You know, there's chronic effort to control or to be controlled to feel secure. So security is wrapped up in that. Codependents feel responsible for other people, avoid responsibility for their own life. So it keeps them in this reaction mode instead of acting, you know, from a stable sense of self. And so, you know, the group, it becomes the central reference point for reality. You know, members or friends are encouraged to see themselves as responsible for protecting the group's image. And so protecting the system at all cost is very much equivalent to protecting the family structure. And so you see a lot of lying, and you see a lot of behaviors that protect the system. And this is at the cost of even ignoring our own internal signals, you know, that intuition, like, something's off. But protecting the system is more important. And so why is learning about codependency important? You know, and I kind of referenced it before. If you're doing healing work, sometimes this is overlooked, and it's not considered important to address. So especially when recovering from toxic relationships, when I used to treat men and women coming into therapy, coming out of a domestic violence relationship, we did a lot of work with codependency, addiction too, a lot of codependency work with addiction. But you don't want to repeat getting into a toxic relationship, and you don't want to repeat getting into a toxic system. And so there's a lot of parallel. So kind of going into like, okay, so codependency, I sort of understand what that means, but what does it look like? What are some of the behaviors that either we can see in other people or we can kind of see in ourselves? So you see a lot of enmeshment and over responsibility. So codependent people are obsessed with other people's feelings and behaviors. It's really important that they feel accepted. And so, and you see that correlation within the truth, right? Of feeling accepted. There's a huge emphasis on like what other people are doing, and a lot of people feel responsible for other people's spiritual state, especially as parents. Like, oh, we've got our kids' soul salvation in our hands, and so you see that enmeshment. Another thing you'll see is suppression of feelings, and so codependents, they repress their own desires and emotions, and that's to keep relationships stable. So when you look at cults and you look at the setting of cults, the setting really does spiritualize this by labeling anger, grief, doubt. They connect it to a lack of faith. So then people detach from their authentic self. And you think about, okay, well, how was anger tolerated in the church? Especially anger with women, right? It wasn't, and it was suppress it. This illusion of control. So when we think about, codependents trying to control others because deep down they feel out of control or afraid. And so within cults, there's a promise of perfect obedience, correct doctrine, there's safety and salvation. And so then through this, you keep the friends very dependent on external rules instead of developing like an internal resilience. One area is the loss of self. And remember when we talked about depression and how many of us know depressed moms in the church? Codependency means forgetting to take care of yourself and losing sight of who you are. Cults frequently replace personal identity with group identity. So a person's worth is really defined by their role. Are they one of the friends? Are they an elder? Are they an elder's wife? Are they a worker, brother worker, sister worker, elder? So this group identity, and so you lose your sense of you and your authentic self. And then you look at boundaries. And in codependent relationships, very weak boundaries and very poor communication. These are the hallmark of codependency. Weak boundary, poor communication. And so in cults, boundaries are framed as what? Rebellion. So there's not an ability to say no, typically. That's considered unspiritual. And then, in an instance, life choices must be approved or you're seeking approval. And so then you look at dependence of self-worth. And so a lot of codependents will tie their value to what they do for others, and many dislike themselves. And so in cults, you see the self-worth is tied to spiritual performance. So attendance to meetings and gospel meetings is all about obedience. So belonging, it really feels contingent on never disappointing the group. And I would say the fear of shunning is very, very real. So that was my bird walk of codependency, but I want to bring us back into the BITE model. So we've talked about behavior control, right? The rules, the norms, and then what that can create codependency. So I want to take us back into the BITE model and talk about information control. That never happens, right? In the church? Yes, it does, all the time. So information control, it really shapes what people are allowed to know, what you're allowed to read, hear, trust. We hear all the time, stay off the internet. I remember, as elders, we would get an email, please share this with your meeting, but, get rid of it when you're done. So the tactics include, restricting access to outside media. I was a young kid when The Secret Sect was published in the 1980s. So I remember hearing a little bit about it, but people were either told not to read it or buy the book and burn it. And so that is a form of information control. There's, filtering information through workers and elders. So again, I talked about letters being sent out. You think back, when the Dean Brewer letter went out, what was on the bottom of the letter, right? You can have somebody read it, but they can't have a copy of it, and you don't leave it at the house. There was very clear instructions on how this information was getting out. And so Another area in the bite model is deception. So deliberately withholding information or distorting information to make it more acceptable. And so this creates an echo chamber where the group's narrative is the only truth. And it makes it hard for the friends to reality test or to even know, what's right, what's wrong. And then there's under information control, there's compartmentalizing information into outsider versus those that are in. And there's even information that's just worker versus friends. We saw that with the overseer meetings. Friends, a lot of people were unaware that a system of administration existed even prior to Brookgate. I can honestly say I had no idea there were overseers. I knew that there were overseers. I didn't realize there was that many. But I had no idea there was even a higher administration above overseers. And then, we've learned about private worker meetings closed to ordinary members of the church. And these meetings are used to disseminate instruction, controversial matters, but never talked about or communicated. And so we, found that through the leaked audio of a worker meeting up in Washington. And so these are just examples of information control. And then one other area too is extensive use of scripture and verses that are taken out of context. And this was part of the bite model as part of that falls under information control. I would also argue that's somewhat emotional control too, and we'll kind of get into that too. So that's information control, just some examples under the bite model. And so then we go into thought control, which I also made a note, spiritual abuse. So thought control really attempts to influence and direct how people think, including their internal dialogue, their beliefs, mental framework. So the use of language, and boy, do we have our own language within the 2x2 church. So much so that under Pathways, we put together, I think it's 4 or 5 pages of language that a person can take in and give to their therapist so that the therapist understands when someone's talking about the friends, workers, meetings, convention, what that means, so that it doesn't take therapy time up to explain the culture of the 2x2 church. Thought control, it really requires members to internalize the group's doctrine as truth. So this is very much black and white thinking. It organizes people into an us versus them, insider versus outsider. So, the 2x2 church claims to be a direct continuation. We hear the shores of Galilee when Jesus sent the 12 apostles. So it's this thought control that the 2x2 church is direct descendants of the apostles. Another form of thought control is also listed in the bite model is change of person's identity. And when I first saw that, I was like, I don't know if that really applies to the 2x2 church. And then I went back and really thought about it and was like, actually, no. We talk about the friends, so identify as friends, not as Natalie or Ben. The use of uncles and aunties to refer to the workers, brothers and sisters. And even if you notice how workers end letters, they'll say in God's name, or servant of Christ, or your brother. That is really taking on that identity. And so definitely meets criteria Another a part of the thought control is encouraging only good and proper thoughts. And then, when you talk about or you think about memories, memories are manipulated and false memories are created. And so and we have a current example of this, historical stories of faithful souls and workers. That could be seen as memory manipulation, especially, over time. And then another area is teaching thought-stopping techniques, which shuts down reality testing and it stops the negative thoughts. So you'll hear a response of being spirit-led. Well, we're spirit-led. And then that's the end of the conversation. Or they'll use scripture, or they'll refer to a past overseer or worker. So, in California, we heard a lot about Eldon Tenniswood. Eldon Tenniswood said this, and we kind of even called it, I think, the Tenniswood doctrine, because he was writing out quite a mantra. And so these are the techniques used, for those thought controls. The rejection of either rational analysis or critical thinking or even construction criticism, that is not allowed in cults. And really forbidding critical questions about the leaders or about, in the 2x2 church, workers and overseers. Questions about doctrine. It listed policies, but we know we don't have policies. So none of that is allowed. And honestly, I think this is why the workers stopped having home visit Bible studies like years ago. I think they got tired of being asked questions that they couldn't answer. But this is also part of the BITE criteria. And then labeling alternative belief systems as illegitimate. So you hear a lot about false religions or false churches. Other belief systems just cannot be considered. So these are just some examples of thought control under the BITE model. And then when we get into emotional control. So this is a way to manipulate and narrow the range of feelings that someone has, or even disconnect feelings from realities. Some emotions or needs are deemed to be wrong or selfish. There is a lot of work around making a person feel that problems are always their own fault, never the leader or the group's fault. So there's no accountability at the leader level. A cult really promotes feelings of guilt or unworthiness, and you'll hear this very often: I'm so disappointed in you, or I'm disappointed in hearing this. And then cults do a really good job of instilling fear. And so when people, try to think independently or consider the outside world, that's all enemies. Growing up and hearing losing one's salvation, and then that fear of being shunned by the group if you do leave, and we saw that even before the crisis. We saw families, and of course there was narrative around why they left. But you'll also see like extreme emotional highs and lows. We call it love bombing in the clinical world. And so, you'll see like maybe a new person will come back to meetings and the love bombing that happens within the group. But you'll have extreme emotional highs and lows. And then under emotional control, there is a huge emphasis on obedience to workers. So combined with the belief that salvation is found only through this system, totally generates fear of leaving or disobeying. And then part of this is a phobia indoctrination, which is really just irrational fears about leaving the group or not becoming part of the group. So kind of already, used the example of the Saturday evening convention message about young person dying before they profess, right? That's fearing, the fear of dying. Like, if I don't profess, I'm going to die, or the fear of dying before I profess. Shunning those who leave, they've lost out. And then under this there is never a legitimate reason to leave. And so, you'll hear, oh, they were dead wood. We got that when we sent out our exit letter. Recently, I think it was posted in special meetings that, this is pruning of the vine, or people never had it anyways. So there's this narrative that gets spun. And I think it's also important to note that emotional control can also be in response to behavior control, information control, and thought control. So I wanted to give a real life example of this. I think Crystal's going to bring up, I wanted to apply these concepts to the Dwayne Hopkins text exchange that was posted, and I want to emphasize this was from January 15th of this year. So this text exchange is in real time. And so what I did is, and as Crystal brings it up, what I did is I took the text that's public, it's been posted, and I highlighted the areas of what would qualify for cults. So I highlighted information control, I highlighted thought control, behavior control, and emotion control. And so, and I'm happy to share this, but you'll see in different parts of the text, it hits the criteria for each of these 4 different areas. And this is in real time. This is the thought process, and this is the communication exchange that just came from the ministry. So I just wanted to put this in real time and just highlight that. And we'll be happy to post that if that's helpful. So I wanted to talk about the impact of leaving. So what was the barrier for leaving, or what is the barrier for leaving a cult? To be honest, leaving feels terrifying. Many people lose community. Many people lose their identity. A lot of people lose family, a sense of safety. I mean, all of this all at once. It's hard. It's hard to even wrap your brain around all of this grief and loss. A barrier is our bodies, right? Our bodies experience loss as a threat. And so, it's anxious. I mean, you get high anxiety right before you leave, and then as you're leaving, but it's after, right? Those trauma symptoms can emerge after leaving. And this happens a lot because our nervous system starts to recalibrate. The barrier of autonomy feels foreign to a lot of people. In decision making, and trust and building trust, it really takes a lot of time. And then there's this shame of being part of a harmful system, a system that really does harm people. And either or you have been harmed by people Dr. Lalich referred this to moral injury, that we are either deeply hurt by seeing or hearing things by people that we know. And so it becomes really, really personal, and it makes it super hard to leave these different types of systems. When we think about the complexity of leaving cults, we use this term a lot, cognitive dissonance. And, basically, two things can be true at once. It's when feelings or your attitudes, they don't match your actions. And so it's really about what you believe versus what you do. And it really helps, this kind of helps explain why why people either defend choices or stay in bad situations. But there also can be good and harm simultaneously. So, many people resist naming their group a cult because they have experienced belonging. They've experienced structure. They've experienced purpose. And so, and I think for some, the church has saved them from a very dysfunctional family. It brought in some protective factors for them. Now, not always and not all. And I would say there's many situations where the church has and is very abusive, but there's a loyalty for some people that have seen this church saving them from a very dysfunctional family. And recognizing that harm doesn't erase positive memories. Cult systems, they meet real emotional needs. And sometimes before exploding dependency, or exploding dependency. So it's just really the emotional and the cognitive toll is very real, and it's complex, and we want to honor that complexity. Accepting both this has helped me and this has harmed me. Accepting both of those can be true at the same time. And I think accepting both of those is kind of a key healing step. And so when we talk about healing and recovery, it's really important to put words to your experiences and understanding the why and how this experience was for you. And so, many of us were born in this system. Our beliefs were told to us, not what we formed. So we have to, really self-evaluate, what is it that I really believe in? And it's not uncommon to question God. It's not uncommon to question Christianity. I do also want to bring up suicidality with people that leave cults. Suicidality, it can be an increased risk. And so please, if you or somebody that is or has been suicidal, please reach out for help. 988 in most places, instead of 911. Well, you can call 911, but 988 is the crisis line. But please reach out for help. And it's an increased risk from people leaving cults. And just the importance of reclaiming your choice and agency. So when I talk about agency, sometimes people are like, well, what does that mean? When we refer to agency, it is the power and ability to act for yourself. So to make your own choices, to influence what happens in your life. And so that's what it means to have agency. And for many people that are coming out of the 2x2 church, they didn't have agency. It's really important that healing involves learning to trust yourself, learning to trust your instincts, your capacity to choose again, and then rebuilding your core beliefs and defining who you are. We hear a lot about deconstruction and rebuilding or finding yourselves, but that all takes time, right? That is not going to happen overnight. And so I just give yourself grace when you're going through this process. And so I just wanted to close tonight with a closing perspective. And I have just finished reading this book, Awake, by Jen Hatmaker. And she has a statement in here that I think is super relevant. It really resonated with me. And so I just wanted to end it tonight just reading this passage out of this book. Great book, too, by the way. And it just says, "Dear one, keep doing the work. Whatever that means for you, recover, heal. It could be trauma work, self-honesty, relational repair, full ownership, sobriety, grief, necessary endings. Do it. Keep slogging. Keep moving forward by the half inch. Hang on to the promise of your whole full life and get there. We cannot fast forward or short circuit this. It all must be felt, admitted, faced, owned, examined, allowed. All of it. There is no other way. It will seem impossible, then too slow, then just hard, and then you make it. There you are, the most you have ever been, worth every tear, every therapy appointment, every hour you spent getting here. You invested in you and you emerged. What a miracle. Keep going, darlings, wherever you are, in some ending, in the slow, messy middle, or starting to see the sunrise again. You are worth this work. Your life is worth it. Go get it. And with that, we're ending this discussion.
I am going to open it up for questions, and we're going to go over a little bit on time here. And normally I do keep this right at an hour, but I really feel like this is such an important discussion. Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for all of that. That is a lot of information, and it is so important, though. And you have taken so many, you've just dialed it down for us. So thank you for that. One of the reasons that I really wanted to move forward on this platform after I started it was exactly this, that we can have conversations, that people can learn language and tools and resources, and that they can build community here and feel like they're not the only one in the world.
Right.
You know, I posted that comment last night after everything that happened yesterday, the whisper of, I'm the only one. If I speak up, I'll ruin everything. And so many of us, the isolation that we went through with all of that. So I really strongly want to encourage everyone out there to just acknowledge their own suffering and to not stay stuck in it. I think that's one of the other important pieces, is acknowledging it, but moving through the grief process and moving through the healing process and feeling worthy of doing that. And so many, you know, we had a situation today of someone that's just the unworthiness of healing, like you already mentioned it, the suicidal ideation of it just being like, I'm better off not living through this. And sadly, we've had a lot of that, too much of that. And here's one of the other things. I want to ask your opinion about this. Next week, for all of those of you who need to get going, because we're at the end of time, next week, Cynthia Lyles is going to be on. And one or two of her people that are on her team, and that's going to be an awesome show. We're going to talk about a lot of things on that. But what I really want your professional opinion about is, where do we draw the line relative to this cult behavior, acknowledging it tonight, which is what we're doing. And then where do we draw the line of sharing information moving forward and talking about things that we never talked about, the good, the bad, and the ugly? I really want to be honest about the number of suicides that we have had to deal with.
Yes.
For those of us who deal with this, we have kind of a small circle where we talk to one another, we rely on one another, we're one another's support system, we go back and forth with texts, but we are not at liberty. Some of it we could talk about. We can statistically say, this is how many suicides that we are aware of that have occurred since the date of Brewergate. This is how many, so is this a forum that we could start having some of those conversations and start speaking some truths about what we deal with that we still don't share? We don't share that information. I feel like
Part of it too, and part of it, Crystal, is we don't have the emotional literacy to put to words, right? What has happened to us. And
yeah.
so part of that healing process, and you don't get emotional literacy until you start talking to it,
Yes.
right? That's
Yes.
why therapy works, is because
Yes.
you're talking to another person and you're developing the vocabulary. We have to speak to it. I
Yes.
will tell you that the the what the tipping point for us to send out our exit letter, because we held on to it for months. We had it written for months and we held on to it. The tipping point was from a suicide. A suicide had happened, and that was the tipping point for Ben and I. And we're like, we're done. We have to put words to our experience. We're done. And yes, there has been suicides,
Yes.
and it's serious.
Right.
Yep.
The young girl in Montana, that one has stuck with me. I mean, she was not even 18 years old. And how do we let that happen? And then nobody wants to talk about it. It just blows my mind. So I really want to encourage people, if you have questions, you know, I have a lot of people who come to me and say, "Oh, I'm not on all these other sites or whatever," and I am all for all of it. I think that the more information that's out there, the better. What are you talking about, or what are you referencing? And that's totally fine. I'm happy to share that information with whoever. I do want to just state that this is a place people can come with real questions and get real answers, and that the team of us that are working behind the scenes, Steve Padden's going to be on right after Cynthia. So, the level of investment and commitment on our part to bring this platform and to have professional people who, it's not just your opinion. It is a professional approach, and what you guys are doing with Pathways. I want to talk a lot more about what resources are even available to people through your organization, Natalie, because it's very, very powerful. And I don't think we do a good enough job at public relations.
Promoting that. Yep.
I mean, part of it's because we've been in crisis for 2.5
We've been
years.
drinking from a fire
Amen,
hose.
girl. All day, every day. Cynthia and I today, she can't make this shit up. Like,
No, cannot.
and it's stuff that I would never, and it's every day, it's something different. And that's what I really just want everybody to know, that there is help out
Yes.
there, and
Yes.
what they're feeling is normal, and to get away from the isolation feeling of I'm the only one that felt this way, or whatever's out there. It really, really, Mardell's saying suicide within the 2x2 community has always been a taboo topic. Yes, it is in general, but it is also, unfortunately, a very real problem.
Yes. Well, in the belief that if you commit suicide, it's an automatic you go to hell because you took your own life. And that's a belief system within the 2x2.
Right.
So you've got layer upon layer upon layer
Yes.
of shame and guilt and not wanting to talk about the topic.
Yes. And I understand that talking about it makes it real, but it is real,
It is real.
and
Yes.
it is happening, and there
Yes.
are resources available, and there is help available. And the other thing, one of the other that we all have been doing behind the scenes on top of this fire hose that we've got going on, is talking about raising funds for the resources to be available for this. The more we are able to have real dialogue about what's really happening, the more likely people are to also donate, because they
That's
will
right.
understand how bad the problem really is. I think that we are still barely scratching the surface on being honest about what is really happening behind the scenes
Yep.
on a regular basis.
Well, and the cost of treatment, right? When we talk about giving, let's have a real conversation on when we help somebody get into therapy and the cost of treatment.
Yes.
I mean, people don't understand
The
that.
barrier, for sure.
Yes, and so
Yeah.
breaking that down. Yeah. Yep.
Yep. Beverly's saying she was my cousin. Nobody talked about it to the family. So many facets to it. Yes. I don't even know that people in general know what happened, or that even did happen. and we could go on and on about those, but I want to get back very quickly, Natalie, to the cult conversation and why it was so important to you and I both, and to all of us to have this conversation tonight. It's so important to be able to put words to it. Part of it is it lightens it up in a way that I feel like we can make fun of it a little bit, like don't be culty, and the t-shirt thing that I posted of ask me how I know it's a cult with the that's just to kind of use humor as a way to say, yeah, that happened. And yes, but it also, what you did tonight for us is give us the framework,
Yes.
understand why it's a cult, why we feel the way we do. So I know when you post that link, that'll be a great resource for people to
Yes.
understand the bite model,
Yeah.
and all of the other. But yes, it is. We have so many layers to go, so
So,
many things to talk about. I
yeah.
do want to value everybody's time. We're getting a lot of acknowledgement out here. Thank you for sharing. All of it. So I think that the comments on this is going to be a lot going forward in the next few days too. But is there anything else that you want to say about this that is just, I I cannot thank you enough for your emotional, personal life commitment, for the sacrifice to your family, for what you have done and do all day, every day. Um, it's very real, and I know, and I
Thank you.
feel it.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. And I feel like the last 30 years that I've been in social work prepared me for this day.
Yes.
And God gave me a gift, and I need to use that gift to its fullest, and this is what it is. It's education and healing. And so this is my life commitment. I will be in this space until I cannot stand up straight.
Yes,
And I've got
yes.
a lot of people behind me propping me up on days that I don't feel like I can stand. So it's not just an individual. I mean, it takes a community. And I'm so grateful for the healing community that is out there that's dedicated to, I mean, this will always be our community, regardless of coming out of a cult and getting away from it, but really not getting away from it, because this is my community and I love my community and I will always love my community.
Yes.
And so I will always be here to help support that in one avenue or another, right?
Totally, totally. And I want to thank you too, before we go, also of for the support that you gave me right out of the gate on making this a public forum, because I do also believe that alone has been a gift of putting the voice and having it be as powerful as it is. So, we have some amazing speakers that are going to be coming on in the next few weeks, and we're going to be doing some special shows here on this. But it's all about healing. It's all about moving forward. It's all about helping everybody plug into all the different places. We're all working together across platforms, across all the things that everybody's doing. Please know that we do all communicate and we are all working together, and we're very good friends. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us. Thank you to all of you who are going to be watching. This will be shareable on YouTube tomorrow. I will be posting that as well.